of the You Lost Me book, Why Christians Are Leaving the Church and Rethinking Faith by Dave Kinnaman, president of the Barna Group. Think if you're drawing a line and you have to stop, pick up your pencil, and continue with that line. That's kind of the mathematical definition of discontinuously different. And I'll argue that there's a digital divide that separates boomers and busters from mosaics. And we'll lay out more of that as we go along. But they're discontinuously different in three key ways. All of these eventually have to do with culture, as we'll talk about in a second, but they're discontinuously different in social ways. They're discontinuously different in technological ways. And finally, but certainly not least, they're discontinuously different in spiritual ways. All three of which make up cultural differences, right? So one of the ways to think about this is to actually think about the amount of cultural change that happens in a generation. And is it possible to place a dial on the amount or the intensity of that cultural change? So if you think about, say, from high to low, then we can actually draw this out in a couple different ways. So take boomers, for example. If you were born from 1946 to 1964, then we can actually map out the three different kinds of change that you underwent. So if you take social, and then technological, and finally spiritual, what were the sorts of changes and what was the magnitude of those changes during your lifetime and your formative years? So boomers, things definitely did change for them socially. I think compare the 1960s to, say, the 1940s or the 1950s, there were some definite social changes. Technology-wise, they changed as well. Sending somebody to the moon, for example, that ain't nothing. And then spiritually, there were some serious changes in the 60s if you compare them to earlier generations, whether that's the GI generation or the silent generation. So some magnitude of change. If we go low down here, high up here on each of these, then we kind of get a feel for the amount of cultural change that the boomers went through. Take busters, for example, though. Those of us that were born from, say, 1965 to 1985, and do the same three dials. And it's interesting in that there's not as much change. Okay, socially, things stay pretty much middling for us. There is change, but it's not dramatic change. It's not impossible change. Technologically, the internet comes along, but it doesn't radically change everything, like we will see with the mosaics in a second. And then spiritually, we're still kind of middling as far as that's concerned too. Not a tremendous amount of change during the buster generation in terms of spiritual impact or cultural impact. But then get to the mosaics, those that were born from, say, 1985 to now, and talk about, for example, think about the social changes that they've undergone. Things like Facebook, for example, have changed the way, absolutely, that they communicate with each other and how they interact with each other. Take technology as well. This generation has seen probably the most change in technology of any generation since probably Gutenberg. It could be argued. Spiritually, this generation had a tremendous amount of change as well, and it's mainly because these two have become so intertwined. Okay, both the social and the tech are fundamentally the same thing, and so that has had profound effects on how young people think about themselves spiritually, how they think about their place in the universe, what they're supposed to be doing, all those kinds of things.